ADHD Parenting for Boys. From Chaos to Connection. Help your son thrive, build stronger communication, and deepen your bond without the daily stress. By Marlow Hayes. Introduction. The Royal College of Physicians in London stands today as a sleek, modern building overlooking the greenery of Regent's Park. It is a place of quiet study, filled with doctors in clean suits and the soft hum of air conditioning. But if you could pull back the curtain of time and step into this same spot in March 1902, the world would look, smell, and feel very different. The air outside was thick with yellow fog and the heavy scent of coal smoke. The streets were a mess of mud and cobblestones, echoing with the rhythmic clatter of horse-drawn carriages. Inside the college, the rooms were lit by the flickering orange glow of gas lamps. Men with thick beards and stiff collars sat in high-backed chairs, listening to a young doctor named George Still. Dr. Still was standing at the front of the room, preparing to tell these experts something that would change the lives of millions of families. He had spent years watching a specific group of children, mostly boys. These boys were smart, they were often kind, but they were also full of mischief in a way that seemed impossible to control. They couldn't sit still, they acted without thinking, they seemed to ignore the rules, even when they knew they would get in trouble. In 1902, the world had a very simple way of looking at boys like this. People said they were bad. They said they had no moral control. They believed the solution was a heavier hand, a louder voice, or a swifter punishment. If a boy didn't listen, it was because he chose not to. If he caused chaos, it was because he was willful. But Dr. Still saw something else. He told the room of doctors that these boys weren't choosing to be difficult. He argued that there was a physical basis for their behavior. Their brains, he suggested, were simply built in a way that made it hard for them to stop their impulses. They didn't have a bad heart. They had a brain that struggled to hit the brakes. This was the first time the medical world officially looked at what we now call ADHD. It was the moment the conversation shifted from "this boy is a problem" to "this boy has a struggle." Yet even though more than 100 years have passed, many parents still feel like they are stuck in 1902. They are still told that their sons just need more discipline. They are still told that if they were just firmer parents, the behavior would stop. The quiet storm in your kitchen. If you are reading this, you probably know exactly what that feels like. You don't need a history lesson to understand the chaos. You live it every single day. Maybe your day starts at 6:30 a.m. with a feeling of dread in your stomach. You know that within an hour you will probably be shouting. You know that asking your son to put on his shoes will feel like asking him to climb Mount Everest. You see him staring at a spot on the wall or playing with a stray piece of plastic while the clock ticks closer to the school bell, and you feel a heat rising in your chest. You love him more than anything. You remember the way he looked as a baby, and you see the flashes of brilliance he shows when he's building something or telling a joke. But the daily grind is wearing you down. It feels like you are walking on eggshells, waiting for the next meltdown, the next forgotten homework assignment, or the next call from the principal's office. By the time the sun goes down, you are exhausted. You feel like a nagger. You feel like a police officer in your own home instead of a parent. You might even feel a deep sense of guilt, wondering if you are doing something wrong or if you've somehow failed him. You see other families at the park or the grocery store where the kids seem to follow directions the first time, and you feel a pang of jealousy that hurts to admit. You are not alone, and more importantly, you are not failing. The struggle you are facing isn't a sign that your son is broken or that you are a bad parent. It is a sign that the old way of parenting, the way based on 1902 thinking, is crashing into a 21st century brain that works differently. You are trying to drive a high-speed sports car using a manual written for a horse and buggy. The Promise of a New Way. This book is about throwing away that old manual. It is about moving from a life of fixing the fires to a life of building a bond. The goal isn't just to get your son to listen better or to make the mornings quieter. Those things will happen, but they are just the beginning. The real transformation is much bigger. By the time you finish these chapters, you will stop seeing your son's ADHD as a list of problems and start seeing it as a unique way of being. You will understand the why behind the won't. You will learn that when he doesn't do what he's told, it's usually not because he is defiant, but because his brain's control tower is still under construction. You will become a proactive, connected leader. Instead of reacting to every explosion with your own anger, you will have a toolkit of strategies to de-escalate the storm before it even starts. You will learn how to restore peace End the constant power struggles by changing how you communicate. Build skills, help him develop the internal breaks he's currently missing. Deepen the bond, move from being his prosecutor to being his ally. Foster success, set him up to thrive in school and life by leaning into his natural strengths. This isn't about perfect parenting. There is no such thing. This is about connection. When the relationship is strong, the ADHD becomes manageable. When the connection is broken, every symptom feels like a battle. We are going to fix the connection first. The ideas in this book aren't just guesses. They are based on decades of brain science and the real-life experiences of thousands of families. We know more now about the male ADHD brain than ever before. We know why these boys crave high-speed video games, why they forget things they were told 10 seconds ago, and why they feel emotions so much more intensely than other kids. A project manager in chaos. To see how this works in the real world, we need to look at David Miller. David lives in Seattle and works as a senior project manager in the tech industry. He is the kind of man who likes things to be organized. His work life is filled with spreadsheets, clear deadlines, and to-do lists that always get checked off. He is a fixer. If a problem comes up at work, David finds the logical solution and implements it immediately. David has a 9-year-old son named Leo. Leo has ADHD. For David, parenting Leo feels like a project that is constantly falling apart. One Tuesday morning, at 7:15 a.m., David was standing at the kitchen island. He had already asked Leo 10 times to put on his shoes. "Leo, shoes, now." David's voice was tight. Leo was sitting on the floor, but he wasn't looking at his shoes. He had found a single Lego brick under the sofa and was spinning it on the hardwood floor, watching the way the light hit the plastic. He seemed to be in another world. To Leo, that spinning brick was the most interesting thing in the universe. To David, it was a sign of defiance. "Are you even listening to me?" David shouted. Leo flinched. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes were foggy, like he was waking up from a deep sleep. He looked at his shoes as if he had never seen them before. "I'm doing it, Dad," Leo mumbled, but his movements were slow and heavy. David felt his heart racing. He felt a surge of rage that scared him. He wanted to grab the Lego and throw it across the room. He wanted to pick Leo up and force his feet into the shoes. He felt like he was losing control of his house, his schedule, and his son. In that moment, David caught his reflection in the shiny black door of the microwave. He didn't recognize the man looking back. His face was red, his veins were popping out in his neck, and his eyes were full of anger. He looked at Leo and saw the look on his son's face. Not anger, but fear and withdrawal. Leo was shutting down. David realized that pushing harder wasn't working. He had been trying to manage Leo like a tech project for 3 years, and all it had done was make them both miserable. He was the boss of the house, but he was losing his son. David's story is the story of so many fathers and mothers. We try to use logic and pressure to fix a brain that doesn't respond to logic and pressure. Throughout this book, we are going to follow David and Leo as they learn a different way to live. We will see David move from being the angry project manager to being the supportive coach. The path ahead. The journey from chaos to connection is not a straight line. There will be days when you feel like you've taken 2 steps back, but you are about to gain a new set of glasses to see your son through. We will start by looking at the ADHD lens. You will learn why your son acts like a racing engine without brakes, and why he is actually younger than his birthday says he is. We'll meet people from history who had this same restless energy. Men like Theodore Roosevelt, who used his hyperactive spirit to become a world leader, and Leonardo da Vinci, whose distracted mind allowed him to see things no one else could. We will dive into the practical stuff too. We'll cover the morning war, 7 pillars to make your house run smoothly without the shouting. The emotional storm, how to handle meltdowns without losing your own cool. The school struggle, how to become your son's Secretary of Defense instead of his prosecuting attorney. The screen wars, why video games are like neurological magnets for him, and how to set boundaries that actually stick. The power of repair, how to fix the relationship after a bad day and start over with a clean slate. You might feel like you've tried everything. You might feel like your son is just wired to be difficult. But I want you to hold on to one thought. Your son's brain is not a problem to be solved. It is a dynamic force to be directed. He has a Ferrari engine for a brain. Right now, he just has bicycle brakes. Our job isn't to slow down the engine. It's to help him build better brakes. The clatter of the horse-drawn carriages in 1902 London is long gone. The moral defect labels are being erased. It is time for a new era in your home. It is time to stop being the fixer and start being the anchor. Chapter 1. Mastering the ADHD Lens. In the middle of the 1800s, everyone in New York City knew exactly how to handle a difficult child. If a boy was loud, restless, or couldn't sit still, the answer was simple: more discipline. People believed that a child's behavior was a direct reflection of their soul and their father's strength. A wild boy was a sign of a weak parent. The common wisdom of the day said that you could beat the nervousness out of a child. If they didn't listen, you used the rod. If they were distracted, you used shame. The Roosevelt was a man who could have easily followed that path. He was a giant of a human being, wealthy, powerful, and known for his incredible strength. He was a leader in New York society and expected excellence in everything. But his son, a little boy named Theodore, whom the family called T.D., was a mess. T.D. was not the picture of a future president. He was small, frail, and suffered from terrible asthma. But more than his physical sickness, he was a whirlwind of nervous energy. He would get obsessed with things, like the natural history of a dead seal he saw at a market, and fill the house with smells and jars of preserved animals. He was loud, he was impulsive, and his brain seemed to move at 100 miles an hour, while his body struggled to keep up. In 1870, many fathers would have seen T.D. as a disappointment. They would have tried to crush that energy to make him fit the mold of a quiet gentleman. They would have seen his inability to sit still as a lack of respect. But the Roosevelt did something that changed history. He didn't see a bad boy. He saw a high-powered engine that didn't have a strong enough frame to hold it. He took T.D. aside and told him something that would become the foundation of the boy's life. He said, "Theodore, you have the mind, but you have not the body. Without the help of the body, the mind cannot go as far as it should. You must make your body." Instead of punishing the energy, he gave the energy a home. He built a gym on the second-floor porch of their home. He bought parallel bars, swings, and heavy weights. He didn't tell T.D. to calm down. He told him to build up. He reframed his son's struggle. It wasn't a character flaw, it was a physical challenge. This shift in how a father looked at his son allowed T.D. to become the man we know as Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, the hunter, and the 26th President of the United States. The Roosevelt mastered a lens that most parents of his time couldn't even imagine. He looked past the chaos and saw the potential. The 30% rule. Modern science has finally caught up to what the Roosevelt felt in his gut. We now know that the ADHD brain isn't just different, it follows a very specific timeline. Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the world's leading experts on ADHD, discovered something that every parent of a boy needs to tattoo on their brain. He calls it the 30% rule. Think of your son's age. Now take away 30% of that number. That is the age of his executive functions. Executive functions are the brakes of the brain. They are the tools we use to manage time, control our feelings, stay organized, and think before we act. In a typical boy, these tools grow at a steady pace. But in a boy with ADHD, the part of the brain that handles these tasks, the prefrontal cortex, is on a slower schedule. It is physically smaller and less active during childhood. If your son is 10 years old, he might be as tall as a 10-year-old and as smart as a 10-year-old. He might be able to explain complex video game lore or solve math problems like a genius. But his internal brakes are actually the size of a 7-year-old's. When you ask a 10-year-old to go upstairs, grab his shoes, put on his coat, and meet you at the door, you are giving a 3-step command. A typical 10-year-old can handle that. But a 7-year-old often gets distracted by a toy on the floor halfway to the shoes. When your son fails that task, he isn't being defiant. He is simply acting his brain age. This is the gap where all the shouting matches happen. We look at our sons and see their physical size. We see their intelligence. And then we set our expectations at that level. When they fail, we feel like they are doing it on purpose. We think they are lazy or disrespectful. But when you apply the 30% rule, the anger starts to melt away. You wouldn't scream at a 7-year-old for forgetting his shoes, because you know he's just a little kid. David Miller sat in his home office in Seattle, surrounded by the organized hum of his life. As a senior project manager in tech, David's world was built on deadlines, spreadsheets, and deliverables. He knew how to make things move from point A to point B. But his 9-year-old son, Leo, was a project David couldn't seem to manage. That morning had been another disaster. David had shouted. Leo had cried. The morning routine had ended with Leo slumped in the backseat of the car, looking like a defeated soldier. David stared at his computer screen, reading about the 30% rule for the first time. He did the math. 9 years old, 30% off. That was 6.3. David leaned back and looked at a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of Leo from 3 years ago, on his 6th birthday. In the photo, Leo had chocolate on his face and a lopsided grin. He looked tiny. He looked like a little boy who still needed help cutting his meat and tying his laces. David felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. For the last year, he had been treating Leo like a small adult who was failing at his job. He had been expecting project manager-level organization from a brain that was still working through the first-grade level of self-control. He realized he had been asking a 6-year-old to manage a 9-year-old's life. It wasn't that Leo wouldn't listen, it was that he couldn't hold that much information yet. David's perspective began to shift. He wasn't dealing with a rebellious son. He was dealing with a developmental delay. It wasn't a choice, it was biology. The reframing framework. Once you understand the 30% rule, you need a way to use it every day. This is called reframing. It is the act of taking a bad behavior and looking at it through the lens of ADHD science. Reframing is like changing the glasses you wear. If you wear defiance glasses, everything your son does looks like an attack on your authority. If you wear ADHD lens glasses, you see a boy who is struggling to navigate a world that wasn't built for his brain. To master this, you can use a simple 3-part framework: the label, the lag, and the lead. 1. The label. Identify the words you are currently using to describe your son's behavior. These are usually the angry words: lazy, annoying, defiant, rude, or unmotivated. These labels are dangerous because they attack your son's character. If he hears them enough, he will start to believe them. 2. The lag. Connect that behavior to a lagging executive function. Use the 30% rule. Ask yourself, if he were 3 years younger, would this behavior be normal? If he's lazy about homework, maybe his task initiation, the ability to start a boring job, is lagging. If he's rude and interrupts, maybe his impulse control is lagging. If he ignores you, maybe his working memory is full. 3. The lead. This is where you decide how to lead him. Instead of a punishment, you provide a scaffold. A scaffold is a temporary support you put around a building while it's being constructed. Your son's brain building isn't finished yet, so he needs your help to do what his brain can't do alone. Let's look at how this works in a real-life situation, like the laundry mountain. Imagine your 12-year-old son has a pile of clean laundry on his bed. You've told him 3 times to put it away. An hour later, you walk in and find him playing with a piece of string, and the laundry is still there. The label? He is being lazy and disrespectful. He's blown me off. The lag? He is 12, but his executive function age is about 8. An 8-year-old sees a mountain of laundry and feels completely overwhelmed. His brain doesn't know where to start, so it shuts down and looks for something easy, the string, to get a hit of dopamine. The lead? You break the task down. You say, I'm going to help you get started. Let's just find all the socks first. You stay in the room. You provide the external breaks he doesn't have yet. The science of the boy. For a long time, doctors didn't really understand what was happening in these boys. In the 1970s, a researcher named Virginia Douglas at McGill University changed everything. Before her work, people focused almost entirely on the hyperactivity, the constant running and jumping. They thought the problem was just too much energy. Douglas proved that the hyper part was just the tip of the iceberg. She showed that the real struggle was attention and impulse. She found that boys with ADHD weren't just active, they were unable to stop and think. Their brains were like a car with a 400 horsepower engine, but the brakes of a bicycle. This is why traditional discipline often fails. A traditional punishment, like taking away a toy for a week, requires a child to use future thinking. They have to remember what they did wrong, connect it to the loss of the toy, and use that memory to change their behavior tomorrow. But a boy with a 30% delay in his brakes lives almost entirely in the now. He doesn't have a strong future self yet. When you punish him, he feels the pain of the loss. But his brain isn't great at connecting the dots to prevent it next time. He ends up feeling like a bad kid who is always in trouble, but he doesn't actually learn the skill of self-control. When the Roosevelt built that gym for TD, he was providing a now solution. He gave the boy a way to use his energy in the moment. He didn't wait for TD to grow out of it. He gave him the tools to grow through it. The Roosevelt didn't use the rod because he realized that his son's nervousness wasn't a choice. You can't punish a boy into having a faster growing prefrontal cortex. You can only support him while it grows. Changing the atmosphere. The most important part of mastering the ADHD lens is how it changes the vibe of your home. When you stop seeing your son as a problem to be solved and start seeing him as a brain to be supported, the tension in the house drops by half. Most ADHD boys spend their entire day failing. They fail at school because they can't sit still. They fail at sports because they miss the instructions. They fail at friendships because they are too much. By the time they get home, their shame cup is usually full. If they walk through the door and find a parent who is also frustrated, disappointed, and ready to point out their failures, they shut down. They become defensive. They pick fights. They retreat into video games where they can actually succeed. But when you use the reframing framework, you become his ally. You become the one person who gets it. You might say, "Hey, I saw you struggling to get off the computer. I know your brain's brakes are feeling a little stuck today. Let's take a walk for 5 minutes to help your brain reset." Think about the power in that sentence. You aren't blaming him. You are acknowledging a biological fact. You are separating him, the boy you love, from the ADHD, the brain struggle. This is what D. Roosevelt did for TD. He didn't make TD feel like a weakling. He made him feel like a warrior who was training for a great battle. He turned the struggle into a mission. As David Miller looked at that photo of 6-year-old Leo, he made a silent promise. He was going to stop being the prosecuting attorney who was always looking for evidence of Leo's mistakes. He was going to become the coach. He realized that Leo wasn't trying to give him a hard time. Leo was having a hard time. That night, when it was time to brush teeth, usually a 20-minute battle of "go do it," followed by "I forgot," David didn't shout from the kitchen. He walked into the living room, put a hand on Leo's shoulder, and waited for Leo to look up from his Legos. "Leo," David said softly, "your brain is really deep in those Legos right now. It's going to be hard to switch to toothbrushing. Do you need a 2-minute timer or a piggyback ride to the bathroom?" Leo blinked. He didn't argue. "Piggyback ride," he said with a small smile. David realized that by lowering his expectations for Leo's breaks, he actually increased Leo's success. It wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about putting the hook at a height where the boy could actually reach it. The vision of the built body. Imagine your home a month from now. The shouting hasn't completely stopped because life is messy, but it's much quieter. When your son forgets his chores, your first thought isn't, "he's lazy," but "his working memory hit its limit." You feel a sense of calm because you have a map. You know that he is on his own timeline. You know that he will eventually grow those breaks, but until then, you are his secondary braking system. When you change your lens, you stop being a fixer and start being a gardener. A fixer sees something broken and tries to hammer it back into shape. A gardener knows that a plant won't grow faster if you pull on its leaves. A gardener just makes sure the soil is good, the water is there, and the sun can reach it. Your son is not a broken project. He is a dynamic force, just like young TD Roosevelt. He has a mind that can see things others miss. He has an energy that, if channeled correctly, can change the world. He just needs a father who can see the president inside the messy boy. By mastering this lens, you are doing more than just ending the morning wars. You are building his self-esteem. You are telling him, "You are okay. Your brain is a Ferrari, and we are just learning how to handle the steering." This is the strenuous life that Roosevelt talked about. It isn't easy. It takes more patience than most parents are ever asked to give. But the reward is a son who grows up believing he can master his own life because he had a parent who believed it first. You are not just raising a boy with ADHD. You are raising a future man who will know how to navigate his own mind. You are building the body and the mind and the soul of someone who will one day thank you for seeing who he really was. The path from chaos to connection starts with this one single shift. Stop looking at what he isn't doing and start looking at what his brain needs in order to do it. The gym is built. The parallel bars are ready. It's time to start the training. Chapter 2. Why does he do that? High above the rooftops of Basel, Switzerland, in 1944, the world felt heavy. The city sat on the border of a war-torn Europe. But inside the laboratories of a company called SIBA, the focus was on the tiny building blocks of the human mind. Chemists moved like shadows between glass tubes and bubbling liquids. They were looking for a spark, something to help people feel more awake, more alert, and more alive. Among these scientists was a man named Leandro Panizon. He wasn't looking to change the world of parenting yet. He was just a man who loved his work and loved his wife, Marguerite. Marguerite, who everyone called Rita, was an avid tennis player. She loved the game, but she often felt her energy dip or her focus slip during long matches. Leandro had just created a new compound in his lab, a stimulant he called methylphenidate. In a move that would be unheard of in today's world of strict medical trials, he decided to test it at home. He gave a small dose to Rita before she headed out to the tennis courts. The change was immediate. Rita didn't just play better. She played with a sharp, calm intensity. She could track the ball perfectly. She didn't get distracted by the wind or the noise of the crowd. Leandro was so impressed by how it helped his wife that he named the discovery after her. He called it Ritalin. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. For decades, doctors and scientists were baffled. They knew that stimulants like Ritalin made adults feel up, faster, more talkative, and more energetic. So why, when they gave it to children who couldn't sit still, did it make them calm down? Why did a speedy medicine make a speedy boy stop and think? This question is the key to understanding your son. It is the secret that unlocks why he does what he does, and it starts with a truth that feels completely backwards. The sleepy brain and a fast body. Most people look at a boy with ADHD and see a child with too much energy. They see him jumping off the sofa, talking over people, and moving like a spinning top. The common belief, the myth, is that his brain is overactive. People think he has too much fuel in his tank and needs to learn how to turn the volume down. The truth is the exact opposite. The ADHD brain is not overactive. Inside your son's head, the parts of the brain responsible for breaks are often just his brain's way of trying to wake itself up. He is hunting for a spark. He is looking for dopamine, the chemical that tells the brain, hey, pay attention. This is important. If his brain isn't getting that spark from a teacher's lecture or a chore, it will try to create its own spark. It might do this by making him wiggle, by making him crack a joke at the wrong time, or even by picking a fight with you. Conflict is high stimulation. It's a shot of adrenaline. To his brain, an argument feels better than boredom, because at least during an argument, the lights are on. When you tell him to just sit still, you are asking a Ferrari engine to idle quietly while the brakes are smoking and failing. It isn't that he won't stay in his seat, it's that his engine is revving so hard that the bicycle brakes simply can't hold the weight. In David's house, this was the missing piece of the puzzle. David spent years thinking his son Leo was being a tough guy or trying to be the boss. He thought Leo was choosing to ignore him. But one Saturday afternoon, David saw something that changed his mind. David was in the living room, trying to get Leo to come to the kitchen to help bag up some old newspapers. He had called Leo's name 4 times. No answer. David felt that familiar heat rising in his chest. He walked into the den, ready to give a lecture about respect and listening. But when he got there, he stopped. Leo was playing Minecraft. Leo wasn't just playing, he was a different person. He was sitting perfectly still. His hands moved with precision. He was building an incredibly complex castle with secret doors and water features. He was planning 3 steps ahead. He was organized. He was focused. He was calm. David stood there for a long time watching. If Leo was lazy or disobedient, how could he do this? If his brain was broken, how could he manage such a difficult project? David realized that Leo didn't have a focus problem. He had a stimulation problem. When Leo was doing something he loved, something that provided a constant stream of sparks or dopamine, his brain's control tower woke up. The lights were on. The brakes were working because the engine had a place to go. The defiance David saw during chores wasn't a choice Leo was making. It was the sound of a Ferrari engine stalling out because it was being asked to drive through deep mud. The hunter in a farmer's world. To understand why your son's brain works this way, we have to look back much further than 1944. We have to look back thousands of years. There is a famous idea called the hunter versus farmer theory. It suggests that ADHD isn't a disorder at all, but a set of traits that used to be very important for survival. Imagine a tribe of people living in the wild long ago. Most of the people were farmers. They were great at sitting still, watching the crops grow, and following a slow, steady routine. They were patient and organized. They made sure the tribe had food for the winter. But every tribe also needed hunters. The hunters